Shavua Tov, everybody. This week's Parshat Lecha, and we're going to deal with not necessarily a main actor in this week's Parsha, but a very important supporting actor. We're going to deal with Lot. And the question that we're going to deal with is how come Lot, who in the beginning of the Parsha seems to be the heir apparent of Avraham Avinu, who possibly could have taken over the entire project if Abraham would no longer be able to do it. And then at the end of the story, we know that not only that he basically walks off the pages, certainly of Jewish history, that there's a halacha lo yavo amoni movi b'kal Hashem, and even though a root does come from him, but for the most part, he certainly falls off the pages of Jewish history. And the question is why? Now we're going to start, we're going to offer a couple of possibilities. But first, let's look a little bit in the background and go to the end of last week's Parsha, Parshas Noach. This is in Perek Yud Aleph. Pasuk start with Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Vayikach Terach et Avram beno. Terach took his son Avram, Lot ben Haran ben beno, and Lot, who was the son of Haran, his grandson. Sarai Kalaso, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, Eshes Avram Beno, who was the wife of Avram, his son. A lot of redundancy here. Vayetzu itami Urkazdim Lechat Arza Canaan, and he took these people from Urkazdim to go to the land of Canaan. Vayavo ad Haran vayeshu sham. And again, we're not really sure. The Torah doesn't tell us exactly why Terach decided to leave where he was. Certainly not within the text. And why Dafka, his destination is Eretz Canaan, again, is not openly stated within the text, but he doesn't really go all the way, doesn't make it all the way. For whatever reason, he stops in Haran, and that's where he lives. And then the end of the parsha says, "V'yu yimei Terach chamesh shanim otayim shana v'yamas Terach b'Haran." Terach was 250 years old, and he lived, and he actually died in Haran. Okay. Now again, what's interesting here is that Lot, when Terach takes this trip, Lot decides to go with him. Even though Lot could have stayed at home, he could have stayed with his uncle Haran, who did not go with Terach, but he basically decides to go on the journey with Avram, Sarai, and Terach. Now again, why did they go? So there's another possibility, going back just a few psukim before that, in Pasuk Chavches, it says, "Vayamas Haran al pnei Terach aviv beretz moladato be'ur kazdim." Haran, who was Lot's father, died al pnei Terach aviv. A very strange expression. Literally, it means it could be in the lifetime of Terach. Usually, a child assumed should die before a parent. And he dies be'eretz moladato be'ur kazdim. Okay, what does Rashi say here? So Rashi says, again, al pnei Terach aviv, simple pshat b'chayei aviv. Then he says, Medrash Agada, ayidei aviv meis. Haran died basically because of his father. Not why? Because of his father. Shekibel Terach al Avram beno lifnei Nimrod. Al shekatat et slamav. There's a famous story that we know that Terach made his living selling idols, and one day he left his son Avram in charge. He comes home back, to the store, and all the idols are smashed. And Avram makes up the story. What happened? Avram says, "Well, you can't believe it. There was a fight between these idols. This idol took an axe and smashed the other idols." And of course, his father basically tells him, "Come on, you know that that's impossible." So he says, "Well, if that's impossible, why do you believe in these things?" Anyway, Avram already was not buying into the Safah Chassid Dvar Achadim thing. He wasn't buying into the idols. So what happens is, Terach basically reported his son Avram to the authorities to see what they can do something. Help me out here. Okay, so what happens is that he went to Nimrod, and Nimrod basically could not convince Avram to change his mind. And he told Avram, if you really believe in this God and this God's going to save you, walk into this fiery furnace. And as we said last time, was the furnace that they used to make the bricks in the Dura Flaga. And Avram comes out in and out unscathed. Haran Yoshev Yomer Belimo. Haran was watching the whole proceeding, is what was taking place. And he said, Im Avram Notzeach Ani Mishalo. If Avram will come out unharmed, then I'm going to be with Avram Avinu. If they ask me how I believe, I'm going to say I'm a monotheist as well. But if Nimrod, right, will win out in this, then I'll be with Nimrod. Okay, and obviously what happened is Avram was saved, and Haran decides also to walk into the furnace. But of course, Haran was not on the same level as Avram Avinu, and he is killed. Now again, you might think that Lot would have a little bit of an animosity towards his grandfather and towards his uncle Avram, because they were indirectly responsible, or Haran might even be somewhat more directly responsible for the death of his father. And maybe he would have wanted, therefore, to stay in Ur-Kasdim. On the other hand, however, Nimrod actually killed his father. So maybe one of the reasons why Terach decided to take his family away, or those who were willing to go, was because they had to get away from Nimrod. And they get away from Dura Flaga, and they go towards Canaan. And Rashi says in other places, Canaan was the place that originally was supposed to be given to the Bnei Shem. And even though the Canaani were there at that time, interesting here again, similar to the politics going on today, where we have a historical connection to the land, and yet somebody else is living there, and therefore who has the rights. But again, time frame, I'm not really sure what's going on here. Remember, Avraham Avinu lived at Dura Flaga. When did the Canaanim get to Canaan? Were they living there even when most of humanity was with Dura Flaga? Were they one of the 70 nations that split off, and that's where they ended up, so that they haven't been there for that many years? Avraham Avinu was late 40s, early 50s during the time of Dura Flaga, so now he's 75 years old, so they haven't really been staying in Canaan that long. Hard to tell exactly what the time frame is and where everybody lived at that point in time. But that's how Lot, but what we see already in the beginning of the story, that Lot does not stay with Nimrod. He basically goes with his grandfather and father, and he's on his way to Eretz Yisrael, which to a certain extent shows a certain commitment to what Avram believes in. But then it gets a little bit trickier. In the beginning of this week's Parsha, what happens? Perek Yud Beis, starting with the beginning of Lech Lecha, V'yomer Hashem al Avram, Lech Lecha mi'artzecha u'miladetcha mi'beis avicha el ha'aretz asher erecha. Interestingly enough, there is no introduction. Hello, I'm God, and introduce yourself to Avram. At least, or maybe there may have been, but the first command that we have, the first statement that we have that God makes to Avram Avinu is, I want you to leave your land, which I guess at this point he had, what does that mean? It doesn't mean where you're born, I guess, because you already had left there. Leave in Haran, and leave your father's house into the place where we'll show you. He doesn't even tell him where he's supposed to go. I mean, if you tell me I'm leaving Washington Heights to go to Beverly Hills, then it's not much of an nisayon. But if you tell me I don't know where you're going to end up, that's more of a trial. But don't worry, if you do this, it'll be good for you. It'll be right. Those who curse you will be cursed. Okay. And Avram left. And Lot goes with him. And here, for whatever reason, Torah tells us how old exactly Avram Avinu was when he left Haran. He was 75 years old. That Lot ben Achiv, he took, listen to the ordering, he took Sarai's wife, most important part in his life. There's Lot ben Achiv. Number 2 was Lot, his nephew. There's and whatever they owned, whatever they were able to pack up in suitcases. And they also took the people that they had made in Haran. Right? Who were the people that made the Haran? So Chazal tell us that the converse, the people that listened to the Shirim of Avraham Avinu and were convinced that his way was right, and they went with Avraham. Interesting, his father did not go with him, but they went with him. Now, who goes with Avraham Avinu? Lot. So why in the world didn't Lot stay with his grandfather? Right, especially, listen when Avraham comes back. They've already moved again. They're not with Nimrod. They're in Haran. Grandfather's there. Avraham is there with his wife. Lot is there. And Avraham walks in one day and says, you know what? His father says, how's your day, Abe? And he says, well, you know what? I have a communication from God today. What did God tell you? That I have got to get out of this town, I got to get out of this country, and I got to leave you. That's what God told me to do. So Lot now has a choice. Does he stay with Terach, or does he go with Avraham Avinu? And to where? Doesn't even know where he's going. Again, when asked for more details, where did God tell you to go? Avraham can't give a location. And yet, Lot decides that he is going to go with Avraham. Why? It could be that Lot is a Talmud of Avraham Avinu. If Avraham Avinu was able, he was able to convince strangers that his way of thinking was correct, certainly his nephew. And especially since Lot saw the miracle of Avraham Avinu walking into a furnace and walking out, he was a believer. And he's willing now to leave. And so tell me, well, it's not a big deal to leave Terach, because it's a very simple answer. We just read the end of Parshat Noach, the Terach died. So maybe, it wasn't that he was leaving because he was convinced. He was leaving because he had nowhere else to go. He's an orphan. His grandfather died, so he's going to go with Avraham Avinu. Wherever Avraham goes, he's got to go. He's got no choice. But it's not necessarily true. If you look in the last Rashi in Parshat Noach, Rashi tells us that even though the Torah tells us that in the last pasuk of Noach, the Terach dies, he doesn't really die then. If you do the calculations, and Rashi does do the calculations, he has a long time to live. So why does the Torah give us the impression that Terach dies before Avram is given the command of Lech Lecha? Because Avram is known as the Baal Chesed. And how in the world do you promote the Chesed of Avram when he leaves his father alone? Haran is not there with him. Nachar, his other son, is not there with him. He's left alone now. How do you, the Baal Chesed, leave your father? He's not that elderly. He's got another 100 years to live approximately. But how does Avram do that? That's a good question. The Torah didn't want you to think that Avram did it, and therefore it gives us the impression that Terach dies before Avram leaves, but that's really not the truth. So Lot makes a decision that he chooses Avram over his grandfather, and he's going to go to an unknown place, and he's going to trust Avram Avinu. Okay, then what happens when they get there? Fast forward, Perikid Beis, Pasuk Yud. Vayihira Ba'aretz. There was a famine in Eretz Yisrael, and in fact, what do you mean Vayihira Ba'aretz? So Rashi says, Ba'oso ha'aretz levada. There wasn't a world pandemic. It wasn't a world famine. The famine only hit Eretz Canaan. And why? And Rashi says very clearly, as a test of Avraham Avinu. I told you to leave Haran and a place where there was water and everything, the economy was great. And you're gonna go to a place which is so much better. And you come to that place and there's an unbelievable famine there. Ad kedei kach, it says that what happens? Avram was forced to leave Canaan because of the famine, and he goes to Mitzrayim. Who goes with him? Lot. Lot doesn't say, if this was a test, Avraham Avinu, as Rashi says, it's a test to Lot as well. You told us to come here. I gave up leaving Grandpa alone to come here. Everything was supposed to be great, and look what, it's a disaster. Lot could have packed up his bags and instead of going down to Egypt, could have gone back to Haran. And he doesn't. He goes with Avraham Avinu. He's convinced. And what happens when they get to Egypt? He goes down with him. In later on, in Perek, in Perek Yud Gimel, beginning of the Perek. So we know what happened in Egypt. We know that Sarah was kidnapped, and Paro wanted to take Sarah as his wife, or at least certainly his mistress. And a plague breaks out in the house of Paro, and Paro is forced to free Sarah. He finds out that Sarah is really not Avram's sister, but rather it's his wife. Okay, so in the beginning of Perek Yud Gimel, it says, "V'yal Avram Mitzrayim." Avram is coming back from Egypt. Now listen carefully to the order. Who? He. V'ishto, his wife, number 2. V'chol asher lo, and whatever he had with him. V'lot imo hanegba, and Lot with him comes up from the south of Eretz Yisrael. Again, why do we have to repeat all these things? I don't know, but we see, interestingly enough, that Lot is no longer right there, right after Sarai. It's Lot, v'chol asher lo. I'm sorry, it's Sarai, v'chol asher lo, and then Lot. And it's not Lot ito, but Lot imo. Change, a little bit of a change. Something happened. Okay, we'll discuss that in a second. Avram is coming back with a tremendous amount of money, with cattle and with gold and with silver. He went on his journeys from the south of Eretz Yisrael to Beit El. He went back to the place where his tent was originally when he first came to Eretz Yisrael. Bein Beit El, Bein Ha'ai. He goes back to the Mizbeach that he made there originally. Vayikra Sham Abraham b'Shem Hashem. And Avram basically continues doing that which he's done up till now. So Rashi in Pasuk Gimel, what does it mean by Yelech Lamasav? What do you mean he went back to his journey? So Rashi makes a point. Kishachaza miMitzrayim l'Eretz Canaan, on his way back from Egypt to the land of Canaan, Hayaholech v'lon b'achsaniot shalon behen b'achilas l'Mitzrayim. He stayed at the same inns, the same motels that he stayed on in his way down from Canaan to Mitzrayim. L'lamedcha derech eretz, to teach you derech eretz. Shlo yishana adam me'achsanya shelo. You shouldn't change. Meaning, what's the point? Why do you have to tell me? Who cares that he stayed in the same hotels or the same hotels on his way back to Canaan as it was on his way to Egypt? Who cares? The Torah makes a point of it. Now, why did he leave Canaan to begin with? He didn't have any money. He was broke. And so obviously where he stayed on his way down, he stayed in cheap, youth hostages, maybe. Hostels, not youth hostels. He certainly didn't stay 5-star hotels. But now he was coming back, he's loaded. And he could have afforded to stay to upgrade into the better place. He doesn't. Because again, in most cases, I don't know if this halacha applies today or not, because today, you go to a tourist resort, there are 50 options, and people don't know one way or the other whether whether we stayed there last year, you're coming back to another place this year. No one knows the difference. But then I would imagine they were small places. Guests came in, they knew, and they could tell that, when you needed me, when you didn't have money, I was good enough. But now that you come a little bit of money, now you're going somewhere else. And that would have been insulting, and Avram doesn't do that. Rashi gives a second shot. Because they're also para hakfosov. Oh, you know what happened? On his way down, he charged it. He didn't have enough money. He put it on his charge card. And then he packed out. And now on his way back, what is he doing? He pays in cash what he owed. So that's why, again, but the simple pshat in the psukim, and certainly Rashi reinforces that, is that even though Avram comes back, and in a totally different financial situation than he went down, his life for the most part does not change. He goes back. He lives in a tent. He goes back. His day is the same way. He is doing the same thing he did when he didn't have any money. And he's unaffected by newfound fame and fortune. What about Lot? What happens to Lot? So in Parak, again, skip Pasuk K for the time being. We're going to start with Pasuk Vav. It says, again, Parak Yud Gimel Pasuk Vav. Right? When they came back, so again, maybe I shouldn't skip Pasuk. Pasuk says, "V'gam l'Lot Lecha Avram Yitzona Bakra Ba'olim." It seems that Paro not only gave Avram money, but he gave Lot money when they left Egypt. And now the land couldn't hold both of them. They had a lot of possessions. No, just because you have a lot of possessions, again, I don't think Eretz Yisrael was that crowded that it couldn't hold two families with a lot of possessions. But the idea was, now if you, no matter how much room you have, if you don't like one another, it's never enough room. So all of a sudden, Lot, who has been going with Avram from the very beginning, and leaves his Ur Kasdim, then leaves Haran, then goes to Eretz Yisrael, and then to Mitzrayim. And he keeps his mouth shut in Egypt, even though he could have squealed to Paro that Avram is lying to you, and I know the real truth. And he could have ingratiated himself. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He's been loyal. He's a believer. He gives up a lot of things. His father died for the cause. Now, for the first time, we see there's friction. Right? And there was an argument, not between Avram and Lot themselves, but between their employees. And the Knani Prizi were then in the land. What does the end of the pasuk have to do with the beginning of the pasuk? So what does that have to do with? So Rashi says in pasuk Zion, the shepherds of Lot were evil people. They would take their cattle and take them to graze in land that belonged to other people, and they would be eating up other people's pasture land. And Avram's servants would catch them in the act and tell them, "You're stealing. You're mamish ganovim." Now listen what their response is. They don't say, "Okay, you caught us." What are you talking about? We're the real believers. This land, it's not stealing. The land God gave to Avram. V'lo and Yoresh, and he doesn't have somebody to inherit him. Lot, Yorsho. Lot is going to inherit him. Ve'ein zegezel. Not only do they not admit that they're stealing, they're the true believers. We're the true Zionists. You don't believe in God. God gave the land already to Avram. We're demonstrating our belief in that. We are the righteous ones. We're not doing anything wrong. Lecha. And what does the end of the pasuk say? V'kasav Amer v'aknani v'aprizi uz yoshev ba'aretz v'lo zocha ba'Avram adayin. Yeah, there is such a promise, but right now, right today, the Canaan and the Prizi are the owners of the land, right? And it's still Gezel. So that is the fight that breaks out between. Now it's interesting. Shepherds of Lot don't mention that there was a second part of this promise. Not only that Avram would get the land, but that Avram would have his own biological children. That part, ironically, or interesting enough, that part are not mentioned by the Roe Lot. But for the first time, there is a fight that breaks out between them. So Avram says, here's about this. I don't want to fight. We're family. There's plenty of land here. Let's separate. Wherever you go, I'll be right next to you. I'll be there to protect you if you need me. We'll be close. We'll be in traveling distance, but I think it's a good idea that we break up. Now, did Avram Avinu really want to break up? My assumption is no. Right? I would basically say I don't think he really wanted to break up. But he basically So I always tell the story when my wife and I were dating. So I come in one day, we used to date late at night because I was working till 10. Our dates would usually start 10:30 at night. So I'm tired. At the end of the day, I walk in, knock on her door to pick her up. She goes, you know what? And we'd been going out for a couple of weeks. She says, I don't know if I could commit to this relationship. I don't know. So I said, you know what? Goodbye. So you can't commit. That's how we starting off the evening. I said, well, look, I'm not going to continue investing time. You tell me you can't commit. I walked out. I said, go ahead. I said, good night. Have a nice life. And that's it. I walked away. Now, did I really want to walk away from the relationship at that point in time? No. But I was hoping she would basically, take a minute or two, realize, were you crazy? We're the best couple, the best thing that ever happened until peanut butter met jelly on bread, and run after me and says, no, what an idiot I am. It didn't happen. Okay. But that's what I was hoping would happen. Well, we made up shortly thereafter, but I think that's what Avram was expecting from Lot. He's just putting it out there. Maybe we should separate. And what he hoped Lot would say is, are you kidding? You're my only relative. I mean, I lost my father. I'm an orphan. Grandpa's not here. You're my whole life. You're my Rebbe. You're my teacher. You're more than just family. That's not what happens. And he leaves. So this is already a break that takes place between the two of them. And where does Lot go? And even the pasuk goes on to tell us, he doesn't go from Borough Park to Flatbush, which in itself would be a somewhat of a letdown according to some, spiritually. He goes from Borough Park to Las Vegas. He goes from Avram Avinu to Sodom, which was a beautiful, beautiful place. The way the Torah described, beautiful homes, tremendous lawns in front of them. They probably had a swimming pool in the back. Some homes had tennis courts. Everybody had a Lexus and a Volvo station wagon in the front of the house. Unbelievable golf courses, and it's true. But it was right before God was going to destroy it. It was an immoral, corrupt society. And in fact, Pasuk says, where is this Pasuk? Perak Pasuk Yiralav Yivchalot is Kol Kikar Yarden V'Yisalot Mikedem. What do you mean by Yisalot Mikedem? An expression we saw last week in Parshat Noach. V'Yisalot Mikedem, Rashi says, Nasa, okay, right in the second Shah Medrash Haggadah, he sia atzma mikadmusa shalolam. He was basically running away from God. And if you can leave Avram Avinu to go to Sodom, you're basically saying, I've had it with this monotheistic business. I'm done with this God business. I am joining the opposing view. So simple pshat, right? Simple pshat in the story, and it may be true, pshat even, is that what happened, Lot was successful in overcoming a number of tests that went his way. He was able, test of his father dying, the test of going to an unknown country and leaving his family behind, whatever remained, the test of going to Egypt and everything that happened. All that was fine. What happened, however, once he got money and he saw that his uncle wasn't willing to, enjoy the money that he got, not to upgrade his home living purpose and not to change his lifestyle, and that he wasn't anything part of it. He's not going to be wealthy. He's going to live the life of the rich and the famous. And the test of wealth was what got him in. And the obvious lesson here is that, there's always tests in the world. And when we passed one, God's going to give us another one. And just because we were successful in one doesn't mean we're going to be successful in the other ones. And maybe sometimes the fact that we're not wealthy is in our best interest, because her life would be different. We would not be able to handle the Nisayan of wealth. This is possibility number one. And it's a simple shot. However, I think there's more to it than that. Why? In Perek Tez Zayin, Pasuk Aleph, we'll see, and this is a little bit later on in the story. It says, "V'sarai eshes Avram lo yodalah v'lo shivchat mitzris u'shemo Hagar." Again, why are we skipping that? We'll see in a second why I'm skipping to that pasuk. This is when Sarah didn't have any kids, even though it was a promise that Avram would have kids. She had a maidservant, an Egyptian maidservant. Where'd she get in Egypt? They didn't spend that much time in Egypt, and she suggests that Avram Avinu should marry this maidservant. Maybe this maidservant will be able to provide him with a child. Who was this Egyptian? So Rashi says, Bat Paro Hoita, right? Now here it's interesting, Maisa of a similar banim. Just like later on, the daughter of Paro is going to be instrumental in the Yetzias Mitzrayim story. She's the one who saves Moshe. And here you also have a Bat Paro who's running away from home or leaving home and joining the Avram family. Kishara Nisim Shanasu Sarah, when he saw the miracles that were done to Sarah, Amamutav Shetehei Biti Shivcha B'Bayit Zeh V'Lo Gvira B'Bayit Acher. Now this is a hard Rashi for me to accept, that because we'll see in the second Paro did not want anybody else being influenced by Avram Avinu. He doesn't ask Avram Avinu, what, you're a man of God. I see the miracles that God has done for you. Please come and open up yeshiva and teach my people. He basically throws him out of Mitzrayim, whether it's Paro who gave Hagar over, or whether Hagar on her own decides to come. But Hagar, it seems, according to this, is the daughter of Paro. If that's the case, then if you have a Bat Paro being influenced by the short stay of Avram Avinu in Mitzrayim, so certainly Lot should have been. Then why is the Yerida and Lot Dafka coming after Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim was another open miracle that Lot sees. I mean, the chances they come to Mitzrayim and she is taken to prisoner by Paro, and Paro thinks he's doing all right, and there are guards there, and there are hundreds of other people. What are the chances that this is going to end well for Sarah and Avram Avinu? And yet, not only does Paro send her out, and he's not even angry at them, sends them out with money, and what unbelievable Kiddush Hashem, what a nace. You would think that he would be strengthened by what took place. And in fact, later on, not only does that bother me, but there's a story later on in Perek Yudalet, Pasuk, where is this? Perek Yudalet, Pasuk Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. We know the famous story that after Lot moves to Sodom and Amorah, there's a World War I breaks out between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, and Lot is captured. Pasuk is Vayiku, again, Perek Yudalef, Pasuk Yudalef, Vayiku et Kol Chush Sodom va'Amorah. The 4 kings took all the property of Sodom and Amorah. There's Kol Achlam Vayilechu, everything, and they left. Then it says Vayiku et Lot ve'Tuchusho ve'Achi Abraham. They took Lot and all his property, and who was Lot? He was a relative of Abraham. Vayilechu, and they went. Why do you have to mention both things? Because it seems that there were 2 goals in the war of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. They had a political goal and they had a religious goal. It was a religious war as well. They were fighting politically to capture the territory, but there was a fight against anybody who believed in Abraham. They thought when they captured Lot, first of all, some people might have thought they even captured Abraham because they looked alike, but even if not, this was the heir apparent. Where they capture him, that will be the end of the movement of Avram Avinu. And that was another goal, an equal goal in regard to the war. And yet, what happens? We know that in Pasuk Yudalet, it says in that paragraph, Yishma Avram ki nishba achiv. Avram hears that his brother, his relative, was captured. Vayarak es chanikav yilidei beito shmona asar ushlosh meot yidov adan. So what happens? He doesn't say a chaval. Let me go to the local authorities and see if we can create a rescue mission, see if the army can rescue him. He goes and he's going to rescue him personally. And who does he take with him? So simple pshat in the pasuk is he takes whoever's at his yeshiva, 318 talmidim, which is not a bad number of talmidim, 318. He takes everybody. Rashi goes even further and says the word chanichav is written chaser. It means the Eliezer, right? He didn't take 318, right? He took only Eliezer. In fact, he goes on to say even the gematria Shmonasa Eliezer levadahu v'hu minyan gematria shel Shemol. The number of Eliezer gematria is 318. He didn't take. He according to Chazal, there's a possibility he went with even just Eliezer, and the two of them go. And even if we're just even if we're 318 people with no military experience, with no weapons, with no nothing, they're right. The five kings already lost to the four kings. And these are the most powerful army in the world, and they defeat them. So here's another miracle that takes place. And Lot, who may have gone because of the money, as we said before, lost all his money, lost his home, lost everything, and for who knows how long he was a captive. And now Avram Avinu is saving him. You would think at this point, right, seeing another miracle that takes place, he would rejoin Avram Avinu and said, "Okay, Uncle, I made a mistake. I'm coming home." But he doesn't. Why? Why don't these things seem to impress him? So if we go back to the pasuk, remember we asked when they came back from Egypt. I mentioned to you the positioning of Lot. Lot is positioned at the end of the pasuk, not somewhere near the beginning of the pasuk. He no longer is on the same level going back to Eretz Yisrael as he was when he first came to Eretz Yisrael. What happened? Our assumption was at the time that Lot had fallen religiously. He was influenced by the money, and that's what happened. He wasn't the same man who came back to Eretz Yisrael as the man who left Eretz Yisrael. I'd like to offer another totally different possibility. And what is that possibility? That what bothers him, there are a number of things that bother him. Yeah, there was a distance between Lot and Avram, because Lot didn't idolize Avram as much as he had done beforehand. Why not? Because he saw a number of things. Sometimes when you are close with somebody, that's why there's supposed to be a distance between the Rebbeim and Talmidim, a certain amount of distance. You get to live with somebody up. You see his positive things, but you get to see his flaws. Everybody's flawed. And Lot saw a number of flaws in Avraham Avinu. What was the first thing they see? Number one is, why did Avraham Avinu have to leave Eretz Yisrael? God told you to come to Eretz Yisrael. You left Eretz Yisrael. There are other people that still stayed in Eretz Yisrael during the famine. Why did you have to leave? That's not the Avram who I knew who walked into the furnace. Doesn't seem to be the same guy. And then there's something else that was problematic. You lied about Sarah. You put her in unbelievable danger. You said she's your sister. You left her alone. That's also not the uncle that I came and admired. And by the way, these questions are not just questions that Lot raises on Avram. The idea of leaving Eretz Yisrael and what happened to Sarah, the Rishonim deal with that. Not so Pashut, right? And then what happens? You in Egypt, yeah, you got a lot of money, but you were thrown out of Egypt. You didn't stick your gun. It was embarrassing that you were thrown out, and you accepted the money. What, the money's going to uncover everything that did it, and he treated you like garbage, and you didn't stand your ground. And last but not least, maybe, the war with the four kings against the five kings. It's interesting that Avram was promised by God that Eretz Yisrael would one day be his. It didn't necessarily mean 400 years from then. That promise is taking place right now. When Avram defeats the four kings, he is basically captured the entire civilized world, or certainly Eretz Yisrael. I mean, the whole country was his. And he had the possibility of making everybody his servant and bring the whole country to become monotheistic. What an unbelievable opportunity that Kadosh Baruch Hu was throwing your way. And yet what happens? Avraham Avinu returns all that. So Lot, who is really a Verbrennter Zionist and monotheist and gave up everything because he believed in Avraham Avinu, the number of things that Avraham Avinu does that he finds questionable. And that caused the distance between Lot and Avraham. Not because Lot went down in Madrega, in Avraham goes down a Madrega in Lot's eyes, right? And that's what happened. So therefore, what happens? Why does he leave? Because Lot says, you know what? I don't have to, I no longer have anything to gain by staying by Avram Avinu. I spent years learning with him. Right? I came to Eretz Yisrael to make a difference. He looks out in Sodom and Amorah and he says, you know what? Right? If there was ever an area that needed a good rabbi to be able to turn them around, it's Sodom and Amorah. I'm going to go. It's time for me to separate, to open up my own yeshiva, and I'm going to go and I'm going to turn this group around. That's his plan. So it wasn't that he was, we don't have to say a negative view, wealth, did him in. No, it was idealistic purposes he leaves. He leaves Avram because it's time for him to open up, to branch out and become his own Rosh Yeshiva. And that's what he does. What happened? Because there's one thing that he didn't learn. And this is a beautiful Devar Torah that I heard from Rav Nissen Alpert, my Rebbe in MTA. Rav Alpert quotes the Medrash Tanchuma in the beginning of this week's Parsha, Lech. And I'm not going to quote the Medrash, I'm just going to quote you just outside. The Medrash starts out with a halakha questions. Are you allowed to say Kriya Shema, right, to be Makabel or Malchus Shemayim while you're walking? And the answer that the Medrash gives is no, right? You're not allowed to. When you're being Makabel or Malchus Shemayim, when you're reciting Shema and Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Soli Olam V'ed, you have to stay in one place. You have to recite it with fear and trepidation and kavana. No, you can't do it while you're walking. However, then the Medrash continues. When can you start walking? When you reach the parsha of Yahavtas Hashem Elokecha, that parsha can be recited even when you're walking. It even says so. B'shachlecha b'kumecha, right? Lecha b'derech shapkamecha. Even when you're walking, when you're standing, sitting, it can be said in different scenarios. Then, when you reach the paragraph of Yahavta, you're allowed to recite that paragraph even while you're walking. And then the Medrash goes on to say that Avram Avinu kept Kol HaTorah Kula, even before it was commanded. Even the mitzvah of Erev Tavshilin, Avram Avinu kept. That's what the Medrash Tanchuma says. And Rav Alpert asked the obvious question. First of all, this is the first Medrash in the beginning of Parshat Lecha. It's a halachic point. It's something, maybe the halacha, how to recite Kriya Shema on my way to shul if I'm late. Can I say it walking? Do I have to stop? That's a halachic question. What's it doing in a Medrash which is more homiletic? And what connection does this Medrash have to the beginning of Parshat Lecha? And he gave a beautiful teretz, and this is what he said. Because the Medrash is bothered by a problem. We have a tradition that Avram Avinu recognized God at an early age. How early? There's a difference of opinion. Some people say it's mid-40s. Some people say even when he was a child. But whatever it is, certainly way before the age of 75 years old. So how come we know nothing about his early stages? And why did God wait till Avram Avinu was 75 years old before sending him on his mission to be Makar of the world? The answer, that was the question that the Medrash has in the first pasuk of this week's parsha of Lech. And the Medrash says, basically answers it with this halacha. Yes, Avram had an elementary knowledge of Hashem. He came to an intellectual conclusion that there was a creator, that there was only one God, and he believed in certain expectations of ethics and morality. Yeah, he did that. But there's a big difference between just a theoretical belief and having it really part of your system, willing to die for that belief. When you're in the process, says the halacha, when you're in the process of searching out God, you stay in one place without being challenged, fear and trepidation, until you finally come to a recognition of God. You don't go traveling, you don't go out and challenge other people because you may end up falling. When are you allowed to go out? Only when you reach the paragraph of Yahavtas Hashem Elokecha. When your relationship is not only an intellectual relationship with God, but it's a love relationship with God, then you're allowed to challenge it. Right? When you reach the paragraph of Yahavtas Hashem Elokecha. How do you know when you're in a love relationship? When you start doing things not because you were commanded, because you just want to deepen the relationship, then you know in your love relationship. That's the end of the Medrash. When Avraham Avinu kept Kol Torah Kula, even though there was no command to do so, even something like Erev Tavshilin, he only did it because he wanted to deepen the relationship between him and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not because he had to do it, not because it was commanded. Then God knew that Avram had moved on to a deeper relationship and was ready to be challenged. Lot, yeah, he believed in God. He came with Avram Avinu. He gave up a lot of different things, but he was not yet ready to move to a place like Sodom. He wasn't let on the level of the Haftas Hashem Lecha. Because he left too soon and tested himself too soon, that's why he failed. Now, the ramifications for this are frightening for even people who have been in yeshiva for many years and decide to move on, whether it's going to secular universities, to moving to neighborhoods that are not from, or even falling in love with somebody who doesn't share your religious values, ramifications. You always think, well, we remain Shomer Shabbos, we remain to learning, we'll go to shul. There are no guarantees in life. Lot, according to this pshat, was very, he gave up a lot up till now. But when you're not yet ready and you think you'll change the world, sometimes the world changes you. Last but not least, I'm just going to throw out a third possible idea, not necessarily only about Lot, but just an interesting thing that I saw in a book called Seder Laderech by Rav Mori, Samach Mori. He gives an idea that that Avram made a mistake. Avram was told in the beginning of the Parshat to leave not only his land, to leave his family's base of Lecha. And he left his father. That he was able to, maybe because his father wasn't yet feeble, and his father agreed, okay, I'll stay, whatever. He doesn't go with Avram. But Lot wants to come with Avram. He's also Beit Avicha. And God didn't want him to come. He's going to hold you back. But Avram's torn. I mean, he's an orphan. He's an orphan because of me. Because his father walked into the fire after him. What am I doing? I'm going to say no. And Avram's the Isha Chesed. And as we see, even when Avram comes to Eretz Yisrael, there's very little communication between God and Avram. Right? Only after Lot leaves does the communication strengthen. And here, this is also, I think, an idea of Maisa Avos Simon Labanim. Just like Bat Paro, that we have by the story with Avram, reappears as a significant character in the Yetzias Mitzrayim issue. Just as Avram Avinu takes with him to Egypt and back from Egypt, people that God did not necessarily want him to take with him, without asking God what he should do or not. Moshe Rabbeinu takes an Erev Rav. He's assuming doing the right thing. These people want to convert. Moshe takes him without asking Kadosh Baruch Hu, but the ramifications, right? No good deed goes unpunished. And one of my favorite statements, that you think you're doing God a favor to be Machdis Tachas Kanfei Shechina. They were responsible for the Chet HaEgel. A lot of things happened because, and the idea here, the third possible idea is that maybe that there are a lot of times in life, Avram was given at the beginning of the parsha a command, which is very difficult. Avram, leave your family. Maybe leaving your homeland wasn't so difficult. But leaving your father, leaving the rest of the family, very, very difficult. What happens when a commandment of God seems to go against your logic? And this time in the beginning, Avram was stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're both good things. Chesed's also important. And yet Lot held him back. It was only when Lot leaves, right? Wasn't good for Lot, but then Avram soars, and the communication between him and Kadosh Baruch Hu is now on full blast. And sometimes I think that might have given Avram, the ability to pass the holy sign of the Akedah, to know that I've seen in the past, God told me something was difficult for me to do. But Lord, I should have listened to him, because God always got my back. He always is out for my best interests. Maybe by the Akedah, I don't understand why God's doing there, but I have to trust in the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's another important point that comes up. But basically, let's get back what we basically really wanted to say. I didn't want to throw out there, but Lot is an interesting character. We can learn from all different types of people. We don't only have to learn from the Avrams, Yitzchaks, and Yaakov's important lessons by Lot. And the two lessons, again, that I just wanted to close on, the idea of different nisyonos in life. For Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, we'd love to have nisyon of wealth rather than nisyon of poverty. but realize that's not always an easy sign. Even a guy like Lech, who passed so many different tests that we may not be able to pass, failed in using his wealth properly. Point number one. And point number two, the idea of positive environment. Never think yourself so strong that you can go out into the world and challenge yourself. It's not so clear. Environment is an important issue. And Lot fails in that. Even though he had the best intentions whatsoever, Sodom influenced him much more than he influenced Sodom. And these are two important lessons, Mr. Hashem, we should take with us. Shabbat Shalom L'Kulam.